In the highlands, beyond a ragged expanse of wind-swept fields, there stood a village that few travelers ever reached. Known among distant storytellers as Ardenford, it was a place where memory and myth passed between generations in hushed recitations. The villagers clung to their old customs, dressing windows with dried herbs and painting symbols on their doorframes each autumn. These small rituals were said to prepare them for a phenomenon that arrived not every year, nor even every decade, but once in a generation, the Crimson Veil. Legends held that during the Crimson Veil, when the moon blazed red against the sky, boundaries between worlds thinned. Beings from elsewhere could wander through old forests and abandoned clearings, and anyone curious or reckless enough to stand beneath that ominous glow might encounter presences not meant for human eyes. Still, life in Ardenford continued much as it always had. Fields were tilled, roofs mended, and old stories told at twilight. The villagers understood that most of their traditions were preventative measures, yet none alive could clearly recall the last Crimson Veil. In time, the old warnings lost their edge, becoming little more than curious legends. One autumn, as the days shortened and the leaves dulled to a deeper shade, word spread quietly that the signs had begun to appear. A flock of crows lingered too long on the eastern ridge. Strange patterns surfaced in the bark of the ancient oaks. The moon, once silver-white, gained a subtle hint of red each evening. The elders advised caution, lighting pale candles and hanging protective charms above their hearths. Younger villagers, many of whom had known only stories, regarded the talk with skepticism. They saw the Crimson Veil as an old superstition, something the elders used to keep them from wandering too far after dark. Among these younger voices were 5 companions who spent much of their free time exploring the outskirts of Ardenford. Seraphine, the most determined among them, pored over old manuscripts in the village archives. She found tantalizing fragments, scribbled notes, half-faded ink sketches that hinted at extraordinary sights witnessed during past Crimson Veils. Taryn and Linley, skilled at climbing and tracking, cared less for old writings, but were intrigued by the possibility of something extraordinary hidden in the nearby forest. Vargan and Ethis, quieter by nature, followed partly out of curiosity and partly out of a desire to stand apart from the fearful whispers drifting through the village. On the evening the moon finally deepened to a shade of crimson, these 5 companions slipped away from the lantern-lit lanes of Ardenford and into the woods. They passed under arches of interlocking branches and stepped over mossy stones that glowed faintly under the moon's hue. They carried simple tools, knives, ropes, a lantern with spare oil, but no weapons. They brought no charms, for Seraphine's careful logic had persuaded them that no real danger awaited. What they sought was proof that the legends were no more than old tales. Their chosen destination was a glade they had found in warmer months, a place wrapped in layers of ivy and wild roses, known to local hunters as Hollow Fern Clearing. There, the air tasted of damp earth, and the silence had a curious depth. Tonight, as they approached, the familiar clearing seemed subtly altered. The moon's crimson light refracted oddly through the leaves, and the undergrowth looked denser than they remembered. Still, they pressed on. A single fallen log offered a place to rest. The lantern's glow settled into the hollow spaces between roots, revealing no threats, just old mushrooms and curled ferns. They took their seats, speaking in low voices. Linley examined strange markings on a cluster of birch trunks. Taryn tilted his head, listening for distant sounds. Seraphine compared what she saw to the scraps of old stories she remembered. According to those accounts, visitors to past Crimson Vales noted a hush before all else, as if every living creature held its breath. Indeed, the forest around them seemed too quiet. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move the highest branches. As the moon rose higher, its red glow intensified until it stained the entire clearing with a muted, dreamlike light. The companions noticed subtle changes at the edges of their vision. Vargon pointed to a patch of darkness beneath a bent elm, insisting he had glimpsed a figure there. Ethos remarked on the faint scent of lilies, despite the season's lateness. Seraphine spotted something else, scattered petals on the ground, pale petals that looked freshly fallen, though no such flowers grew in these woods. They waited, uncertain what they expected next. Then, without warning, the lantern's flame dimmed. No gust of wind had passed, no hand had touched it, and yet the light shrank until it provided only a weak glimmer. In that twilight, the group perceived outlines emerging between the trees, luminous silhouettes moving slowly as if drifting in from another place. Where one form appeared, 3 more followed, until the clearing's perimeter was encircled by silent presences with hollow, unrecognizable faces. Seraphine spoke quietly, calling to her companions to remain calm and hold their positions. No one dared approach the entities, and the entities did not draw closer. It was impossible to discern their intentions. They neither beckoned nor threatened. Instead, they hovered at the threshold of sight, resembling figures woven from moonlight and mist. Taryn attempted a soft greeting. No answer came, only a sound resembling distant murmurs. Linley tightened his grip on a small wooden charm he had taken from his home, though he would never admit to believing in its power. Vargon and Ethis exchanged concerned glances, trying to decide if retreat was wiser than lingering. As if in response to their hesitation, one of the silhouettes drifted near a fallen branch and extended what could have been an arm. The branch split apart without a sound, fragments of wood floating upward instead of falling down. An unsettling transformation followed. The fragments faded, leaving behind only faint sparks that danced in the red-tinged darkness. The companions remembered every warning heard in childhood, that during the Crimson Veil the world shifted just enough for something else to seep through. Standing amid these apparitions, they realized that the old stories had never been empty superstition. There was a presence here, ancient and curious, and it did not appreciate uninvited guests. Seraphine searched her memory for anything that might help. The manuscripts she had studied spoke vaguely of rituals to appease unseen dwellers. She recalled descriptions of old runes etched into stone at the village's edge. Though she had none of those runes with her, she carried a small family heirloom. A pendant etched with a pattern said to bring clarity and understanding. Without fully knowing why, she lifted it toward the crimson moonlight. A gentle hum rose in the air, as if the clearing recognized something. The apparitions stirred, drifting closer, yet without malice. Their forms shimmered, flickering in and out of focus. Seraphine spoke in a careful tone, not a plea, but an introduction. She stated that they meant no harm, that they sought only to understand. In answer, the silhouettes formed a loose circle and began to revolve as though drawn by unseen currents. Their whispers intensified, threads of sound woven into a low choral murmur. Within these half-understood voices, one phrase emerged distinctly, repeated as if it were a warning or perhaps a command. Unable to grasp its meaning, the companions lowered their heads, showing no hostility, projecting only respect and acknowledgement. Then, as quietly as they had emerged, the entities began to fade. One by one, they slipped into the deeper darkness beyond the crimson glow. The lantern's flame flared back to life, and the hush that had enveloped the clearing lifted. The distant creaking of branches and the soft sigh of nighttime animals returned, as if a spell had been broken. The companions did not linger. They gathered their belongings and followed their earlier trail, retracing their path by starlight. A gentle pall remained over them as they moved through the forest. No one spoke until they reached a familiar stream, where the water's soft murmur comforted them. Under normal circumstances, they might have debated whether what they had seen was real. But tonight, no one doubted. The sight of those silhouettes had been too precise, too measured, to dismiss as illusion. By the time they emerged from the woods, pale light of dawn stretched over the fields. Ardenford's rooftops gleamed softly, the village as calm and unsuspecting as always. The companions knew they carried a secret few would believe. They had touched the edge of an ancient boundary and returned, and though they bore no physical scars and shared no words of alarm, each carried a new understanding. Some forces move quietly through the world, unseen until conditions allow them to show themselves. In the days that followed, the companions chose silence over boasting. When younger villagers asked if they had ventured out that night, they only nodded vaguely. When elders looked at them knowingly, the companions offered careful smiles. They had learned that certain mysteries belonged to the landscape and sky, passing overhead like rare constellations and leaving one changed in subtle, irreversible ways. As seasons turned and the memory of the Crimson Veil retreated into whispered recollection once more, Ardenford's old traditions gained new meaning. Charms remained above doorways, and symbols reappeared on lintels. In quiet corners, candles flickered beside heirlooms etched with lost languages. The companions, though never fully explaining their experience, understood why such practices had persisted. When the next Crimson Veil would come, no one could say. But the village now held a steadier reverence for that distant crimson glow, aware that it was no mere fable. The veil had lifted briefly, showing another realm just beyond their own. The companions, wiser and more thoughtful than before, knew their place in the cycle. They had ventured into the forest as skeptics, and they had returned as guardians of a quiet truth. Some mysteries thrive in the delicate spaces between worlds, And respecting those boundaries is what keeps both sides in harmony.